The bizarre and often grotesque imagery of the Book of Revelation haunts like a specter over the past 2,000 years of Christian history. To the average reader, some of its most memorable images are also its most mysterious. The number 666 and the phrase "Mark of the Beast" have embedded themselves in pop culture, even though most people don't know what they mean. And even experts often struggle to understand what the author of Revelation, a Jewish prophet known simply by the name John, was trying to communicate through these symbols. For many, the ambiguity is part of the appeal. Christians have spent centuries debating the meaning of John's visions and the warnings they contain about the future. Paranoia about the mark of the beast and the number 666 has become a permanent fixture of modern evangelical Christianity. Thanks to modern scholarship, however, we know that the Book of Revelation was just one example of a wider body of apocalyptic literature. Much of the imagery and symbolism in Revelation, including the seven-headed dragon, the beast from the land and the sea, and the various hidden references to the Roman Emperor Nero, does not in fact originate with John and the sacred visions he claims to have experienced, because we find the same myths and motifs in other, less well-known Jewish and pagan texts. John may claim to have been shown these things in divine visions, but the data shows otherwise. John's real skill was not that of a seer, but that of a writer who was able to mix and match bits of Jewish and Greco-Roman mythology to promote his own political and theological viewpoints. In this documentary, we will take a look at some of the most famous elements of Revelation to see what they mean and where John really got them from. We'll also explain ancient conspiracy theories about Nero's death and expectations of his future return, a social phenomenon that explains some of the stranger passages in Revelation associated with the Antichrist. In chapter 13, John describes a vision in which he sees a beast rising out of the sea. The beast has 7 heads, 10 horns, and the body parts of a leopard, bear, and lion. One of its heads receives a seemingly fatal death blow, but then the wound is healed. This miracle causes the world to follow the beast, and it is given permission to rule for 42 months. Then a second beast rises from the earth. This one has 2 horns and speaks like a dragon. This beast from the land makes the people of the world worship the beast from the sea. It performs miracles and deceives the world, creating an image of the first beast that comes alive and kills those who do not worship it. This second beast also causes everyone to receive a mark that they need in order to buy and sell, the so-called Mark of the Beast. John cryptically states that this mark is the name of the beast, or the number that represents its name. He says, "Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. This chapter contains a bewildering mixture of symbolism from a variety of sources. Let's take it apart, one piece at a time, starting with the 2 beasts. The text of Revelation 13 presents us with 2 mysterious monsters, a beast from the sea and a beast from the land. According to New Testament scholar David Ahn, the first beast clearly reflects the Jewish myth of Leviathan, the primordial sea monster, and the second represents Behemoth, the monster of the desert. The Leviathan Behemoth myth that John uses here is not the original Leviathan myth from Canaan and ancient Israel, but a newer eschatological myth that appears in 3 other Jewish sources from the 1st century AD, 1st Enoch, 4th Ezra, and the 2nd Apocalypse of Baruch. In 1 Enoch 60 verse 7, Michael describes to Enoch how at the creation of the world, the monsters Leviathan and Behemoth were separated, with Leviathan being made to dwell in the depth of the sea, and Behemoth occupying the dry desert. These beasts have been reserved for the end times, and on the day of judgment, they will serve as food for the righteous. Similarly, chapter 6 of the book of 4th Ezra presents a vision of creation in which Leviathan and Behemoth are created by God on the 5th day, separately from the other animals. Behemoth is given authority over the desert mountains, and Leviathan is given the seas. But God reserves them to be eaten at an unspecified time. In chapter 29 of 2nd Baruch, Baruch is told by God that after the Messiah is revealed, Behemoth will be revealed from his place, and Leviathan will arise from the sea. Both monsters have been kept separate since the 5th day of creation, and with the Messiah's coming, they will serve as food for the righteous remnant. John borrows this apparently widespread Jewish idea that Leviathan and Behemoth have been reserved for the end times, but he makes some changes. Instead of providing food for the saints, these beasts are now enemies of God, who will rule for 42 months, a motif that originates with Daniel chapter 7. Daniel, of course, was talking about the desecration of the Jerusalem temple by Seleucid King Antiochus IV, but John is applying it to the Romans. There's no doubt that John is relying on Daniel chapter 7, for the beast of the sea is precisely a combination of Daniel's 4 beasts, from the 7 heads to the 10 horns and the leopard, bear, and lion parts. The beast from the land, which has 2 horns, is probably inspired by the 2-horned ram of Daniel 8. Interestingly, the eschatological narrative inserted by John into the Leviathan Behemoth myth might also have another source. A 3rd century Christian named Lactantius wrote a book called The Divine Institutes, containing an oracle about a future king whose actions mirror those of the 2 beasts in Revelation 13. However, Lactantius is not dependent on Revelation. According to experts like David Flusser, his story predates Revelation and appears to come from a now lost Zoroastrian text called the Oracle of Hystaspes that was adapted for Jewish use. In Lactantius' story, the evil king demands to be worshipped as the Son of God, and he is given authority to perform signs and wonders, such as calling down fire from heaven and making a statue speak. Those who believe in him are branded like cattle. Those who refuse his mark flee to the mountains or are tortured and killed. His reign of terror lasts 42 months. It seems likely that John combines some version of this oracle with the apocalyptic Leviathan Behemoth myth, making Leviathan the wicked king and Behemoth his henchmen who perform signs and miracles. The mark given to the wicked king's followers becomes John's mark of the beast, needed for buying and selling. John's main original contribution here is the connection between the mark and the ability to buy and sell. In short, John of Patmos was an imaginative editor, but his story in Revelation 13 is neither a divine vision from heaven nor an invention of his own. It's a mashup of a Leviathan Behemoth myth that was already widespread in Jewish apocalypses, an ancient Persian Jewish oracle of an end-times king, and Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts. If there's anything new John brings to the table here, it's his perspective on economics. Let's look at that next. According to a recent study by David H. Winkle, the author of Revelation sees economics as being closely intertwined with Satan's dominion over the world through the Roman Empire. Winkle believes that John primarily has coinage in mind when he speaks of the mark given to followers of the beast of the sea. In a separate paper, Richard Oster also notes that much of Revelation's imagery from grotesque beasts to censers, altars, diadems, thrones, and animals, is mirrored in Roman coinage, which uses many of the same symbols and images to communicate related ideas. When Revelation 13 speaks of the mark of the beast, the word translated mark is haragma, which can mean an engraving or a stamp, such as an image stamped into a metal coin. Typical Roman coins bore the image of the emperor on the obverse, and another image, often one of the Roman gods or goddesses, on the reverse. Judaism, of course, viewed graven images as offensive, and several Judean political crises had recently been provoked by the Romans' culturally insensitive use of images, such as when Pilate brought effigies of Caesar into Jerusalem, and the attempt to install a statue of Caligula in the Jerusalem temple. A number of theories that link the mark of the beast in Revelation with Roman coinage have been proposed by scholars in recent years. One promoted by David M. May is that John has a special stamp called a countermark in mind. Countermarks were images or text stamped into existing coins for a variety of reasons. For example, after Nero's death in 68, the Roman Empire was plunged into civil war as 5 contenders, Vindex, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, fought to succeed Nero as emperor. Countermarking coins with their own insignia was one of the ways they promoted their own authority, and the countermark was often positioned to deface the head of Nero on the coin. While most of the contenders were based in the West, Vespasian was based in the East, and a type of coin called a cystophorus that circulated mainly in Asia Minor was frequently countermarked by Vespasian during his rebellion. This is interesting because Revelation is specifically addressed to 7 cities in Asia Minor, and 6 of those cities had local mints where this countermarking was probably carried out. For his countermarks, Vespasian often used an image of Capricorn, a creature that combined a goat with a fish. Capricorn was associated with Emperor Augustus and with lordship over Italy, and by using it, Vespasian was declaring himself a new savior of Rome. A different coin-related theory has been proposed by Deborah Furlan Taylor. She believes that the mark of the beast is related to coinage reforms that took place a few years earlier. During Nero's reign, prior to the Jewish War and the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, Judeans were expected to pay a special temple tax for the temple's upkeep. Most Roman coins were disallowed for this purpose due to their idolatrous iconography. Instead, silver tetradrachms minted in the city of Tyre, often called Tyrian shekels, were the standard currency used for the tax, preferred both for their non-Roman imagery and their high silver content. In fact, Palestine was one of the only places in the Roman Empire where commerce could be conducted without Roman or Roman-style coins thanks to the ubiquity of Tyrian shekels. In the year 60, however, the production of Tyrian shekels was severely curtailed, and new tetradrachms from a rival mint in Antioch flooded Palestine. These coins featured the portrait of Nero, sometimes with additional elements depicting the emperor as divine. Before long, it would have been difficult or impossible for Jews and Jewish Christians in Palestine to engage in commerce without handling these coins. Regardless of the exact relationship between Roman coinage and the mark of the beast, it seems clear from Revelation 13:17 that the mark was intrinsically linked with the ability to buy and sell. John expected his audience to abstain from any use of Roman coinage that bore the idolatrous image of the beast, even if that made it impossible to participate in regular commerce. Although it seems clear that the beast from the sea represents the emperors of Rome, John never gives any explicit names. Instead, he employs the ancient practice of Gematria, which allowed words to be represented by numerical values. Sometimes this was done for symbolic effect. Other times it was meant to hide or obscure a name. We can look at the apocalyptic Sibylline oracles for contemporary examples of Gematria. Book 5 contains an ex eventu prophecy written after the fact, that names several Roman emperors cryptically using Greek Gematria. The first emperor is described as having the initials 20 and 10, which stand for Kappa and Iota, Julius Caesar. Next is 1 for Alpha, referring to Augustus. Then 300, which represents the letter Tau for Tiberius, and so on down to Trajan. Another relevant example can be found in the first book of the Sibylline Oracles, which uses 888 as a cipher for the name Jesus. Gematria could also be used to form associations between words or phrases. In his book, The Life of Nero, the historian Suetonius points out that the name Nero has the same value as the phrase killed his own mother, implying that numerology confirms this historical fact about Nero.
In Revelation 13:17, the mark of the beast is linked to the name and number of the beast.
In the next verse, John says it is the number of a person, and the number is 666. The most widely accepted solution to this puzzle relies on Hebrew Gematria. If the name of Nero, Caesar, in Greek is converted into Hebrew letters, the values add up to exactly 666. This solution is not actually perfect, since it requires a defective Hebrew spelling of Caesar. However, this spelling is attested elsewhere, and the number 666 might have been preferred for additional reasons. In particular, the Greek word for beast, therion, also becomes 666 when transliterated into Hebrew. This number play reinforces the identification of Nero as the primary antagonist represented by the beast from the sea. Now, a minority of early manuscripts contain the number 616 instead. Some scholars think this represents the Latin spelling of Nero without the final N. Others think this change was made by a scribe who couldn't make sense of 666, but knew that 616 was the number of Caligula, Gaius Caesar, in Greek Gematria. In either case, 666 should be regarded as the original reading. The Ascension of Isaiah, an early Christian text with Jewish apocalyptic elements, presents Nero as the embodiment of Beliar, the early name for the devil. The reference to matricide makes the identification of Nero unmistakable. Beliar, the great ruler, the king of this world, will descend in the form of a man, a lawless king, a matricide, who persecuted the plant which the 12 apostles of the Beloved had planted. The following verses proceed much like the narrative in Revelation 13 and in Lactantius. The people worship Nero, and he sets up images of himself in every city, ruling the world while the saints of God flee to the desert. But after 1,332 days, the Lord descends from heaven with his angels to bring judgment on the world. Do you notice anything interesting about the number 1,332? The length of Nero's reign is exactly 666 times 2. According to Richard Bauckham in his book, The Climax of Prophecy, the authors of both Ascension of Isaiah and Revelation knew a pre-existing Jewish tradition associating Nero with the number 666, but applied it in different ways. Here, it is associated with the length of Nero's reign, but doubled to approximate the 42 months of Daniel. The association of Nero with beast, on the other hand, can be found in Roman literature. Look how the 1st century philosopher Apollonius of Tyana describes Nero in his biography as written by Philostratus. In my travels, which have been wider than ever man yet accomplished, I have seen many, many wild beasts of Arabia and India. But this beast, that is commonly called a tyrant, I know not how many heads it has, nor if it be crooked of claw, and armed with horrible fangs. However, they say it is a civil beast, and inhabits the midst of cities. But to this extent, it is more savage than the beasts of mountain and forest, that whereas lions and panthers can sometimes by flattery be tamed and change their disposition, stroking and petting this beast does but instigate it to surpass itself in ferocity and devour at large. And of wild beasts you cannot say that they were ever known to eat their own mothers, but Nero has gorged himself on this diet. As Bauckham notes, this is astonishingly similar to the description of the beast from the sea in Revelation 13. Emperor Marcus Aurelius also described Nero as a wild beast and monster. Let's return to the beast from the sea. In chapter 17, we are told that the 7 heads represent 7 mountains, meaning the city of Rome, as well as 7 kings, of whom 5 have fallen. 1 is living, and the other has not yet come. It's clear that the beast represents the emperors of Rome, though scholarship is divided on exactly which ones. If we take this description literally, does the counting start with Julius Caesar or Augustus? And are the 3 emperors who ruled briefly from 68 to 69 included? Each approach gives different results. Other scholars, such as David Ahn, prefer to view the number 7 symbolically. In chapter 13, one of the heads receives a fatal wound that is healed. It is widely agreed that this is a reference to the Nero Redivivus legend. Nero Claudius Caesar became emperor of Rome in 54 CE. In the year 68, on the 8th of June, he was deposed by the Senate and declared a public enemy. Nero committed suicide the following day, but there were few witnesses to his death, and rumor swirled that he was still alive and would soon return with an army to destroy his enemies. Some even believed that Nero had died but would come back to life, a myth known as Nero Redivivus, which is Latin for Nero alive again. The belief that Nero would return was first recorded by the historian Suetonius, and another historian, Dio Chrysostom, wrote, "Even now, everyone wishes that Nero were alive, and most people actually believe it." This belief was pervasive enough to inspire at least 3 Nero impersonators. In 69, an impostor pretending to be Nero gathered an army of deserters and set sail from Greece. A storm forced him to land on the island of Cynthus, where he was executed by the governor. 11 years later, a man named Terentius Maximus, who resembled Nero, gathered a sizable army and led a brief rebellion. Yet another Nero pretender appears in 88. Tacitus appears to know of 2 more fake Neros, but that part of his work has been lost. Most conspiracy theories about Nero had him returning from the east with support from the Parthians, and John wasn't the only one concerned about this myth. The Jewish Sibylline oracles make several predictions of Nero's return. "A mighty king shall like a runaway slave flee over the Euphrates stream unseen, unknown, who shall sometime dare loathsome guilt of matricide, and many other things, having confidence in his most wicked hands, and many for the throne with blood, Rome's soil, while he flees over Parthian land. And then strife awakened of war shall come to the west, shall also come the fugitive of Rome, bearing a great spear, having marched across Euphrates with his many myriads. And one whose mark is 50 shall be Lord, a dreadful serpent breathing grievous war, then making himself equal unto God, shall he return, but God will prove him not." The Nero Redivivus myth has influenced revelation not only in the beast's recovery from a fatal wound, but possibly also in chapter 9, where angels bound at the Euphrates River lead a vast army that kills 1/3 of all humans. Dr. Nelson Craybill, in his book on Revelation, concludes, like other Jewish and Christian apocalyptic writers, John reshaped well-known literary traditions to portray heroes and villains of the first century world. By weaving the Nero Redivivus legend into his work, John seemed to expect that a demented emperor might someday return to mete out vengeance on the very city the emperor once held at his command. We've obviously only scratched the surface when it comes to the complexity of the Book of Revelation, but this analysis shows that almost nothing in the famous prophecy of chapter 13 is original to John. The author may claim to have seen it in a vision from heaven, a standard rhetorical technique for the genre in which he was writing, but we know better. This passage, which has fueled evangelical theology and end-times mania for decades, combines a widespread Jewish tradition about Leviathan and Behemoth with details from Daniel 7 and a separate pre-existing tradition about an evil eschatological king who will perform miracles and brand his followers with his own mark. John further incorporated Jewish numerology about the deceased Emperor Nero and popular legends about his return to Rome from Parthia. Lastly, John capitalized on anxiety about persecution and idolatrous images on the coins that Jews and Christians were forced to use in daily life. Revelation 13 is like John's version of an Avengers movie, with various popular stories and villains converging in a single blockbuster spectacle, presenting what the author hopes will be a satisfying ending. John's own message in all of this is simple. Christians must withdraw from Rome's economic and political systems if they want to serve God and survive in the end times.